Masechet Baba Batra Daf Samech Bet. Today we're going to need a whole bunch of diagrams because we're talking about cases where one person sells a field to another. But he mentions borders and the borders aren't so clear. And so we'll see a whole bunch of cases and how we figure out what he meant when he says these ambiguous borders. Here's case number one. Masad lo meser echad aroch o meser echad kasar. Amarav lo kana ela keneged hakasar. If the seller delineated in the deed, he said on one side, and he mentioned a long line, and on the other side he mentioned only a short line. So now we don't know because they're not, these parallel lines are not of the same length. So how much of the field in between does he want to sell? So Rav says we have to assume it would be that part that's in front of the shorter border that he says. So here's a couple of diagrams. Here's the one that's printed in the Rashbam. So he mentions this line here, and he mentions this line, which is shorter. So according to Rav, he only gets this half of the field and not the part that's in front of all of the long line. Or here's a more detailed diagram. Let's say on this side is owned by Yehuda. So he says, I'm going to sell you the land that on the south side is adjacent to the land of Yehuda. Good, that's 100 amot. And then he writes, and on the north side, the land that's adjacent to the field of Shimon, but that one is only 50. He didn't say Reuven and Shimon. If he said Reuven and Shimon, then that would be clear. He said this whole line 100 and this whole line 100. That's great. But he said this 100, this to 50. So what did he mean by that? So according to Rav, he only gets this area in front of the 50. Because it's Yehuda, well, he just said Yehuda, but he was giving broad lines there. He's not going to go and say half of Yehuda, which half, and starting from here. He just said Yehuda on this side, Shimon on this side. For the fact that he left out Reuven must mean that he wants only 50 by the entire width of 50 all the way until the other side. So only this section. All right, that's one opinion. Amru le Rav Kana v'Rav Aseh le Rav v'ikneh keneged rosh tor shatik Rav. However, Rav Kana Rav Aseh told Rav, wait a second. Why not make it a triangular plot? Rosh tor literally means the head of an ox. Head of an ox, like its horns. It looks like something like the letter A. In this case, it's not actually a triangle, but more of a trapezoid, meaning that, fine, we should give him this length over here, that's because 50, because he said that. But since he said the land of Yehuda, he didn't say just half of it, so he should get this entire length also. And so that would mean that we should draw a diagonal line from the edge of the 50 all the way to the edge of the 100, and that makes this trapezoid, and he should get this entire amount here, and that way you can fulfill all of his words, because he said 50 on this side, and he said 100 on this side. You don't have to give him everything. You're not going to square it off altogether, because he didn't say the land of Reuven, but he should get this triangle piece over here, in addition to what Rav said over here. And Rav had no response to that. It doesn't necessarily mean that he agreed to it, but he didn't argue back and say anything. ודשמעון כנגד יהודה, ולא כתב לה, שמאמינה כנגד ראש תור, הוא דאמר לה. Now, even though Rav seems that he did not agree with Rav Kan Rav Aseh in the previous case, he would agree that if there was on one side borders of Reuven and Shimon, and on the other side there were borders of Levi and Yehuda, and the seller, if he wanted to sell the entire 100 Amah field all the way across on all sides, then he should have written that he's selling that the land of Reuven, that's parallel to Levi, and that of Shimon, that's parallel to Yehuda. But he didn't write that, so therefore must mean that he wants the triangle or trapezoid shape. In other words, we can look at this chart. So instead of here, where this is owned by two people, but this is all owned by one, that was the previous case. Now, this case is where this is owned by Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Each of them are 50 amot long. And when he sold the land, he wrote Reuven and Shimon and Yehuda, but he didn't write Levi in it. In that case, if he meant only this part, he would say just Shimon and Yehuda. He would just say that. That would be sufficient. Or he could write Reuven and Levi, and then he'd only get this 50. Then that's it. And if he meant the entire thing, then he would have to write all 4 names. So the fact that he wrote Reuven, Shimon, and Yehuda, and he'd left out Levi, so that means that he meant the trapezoid shape. This is different from the previous case where this entire thing was owned by one person. So then, according to Rav, he mentioned this line, and he said, let's say this is all Yehuda. He said Yehuda, because he didn't want to specify and say half of Yehuda. But if in fact it's owned by 2 different people, then we have to assume that he meant the trapezoid shape. Rav would agree in that case. Me'eser Reuven mizrach u'ma'arav, u'me'eser Shimon safon v'darom, tzarich l'michtav le me'eser Reuven ruchin teren, u'me'eser Shimon ruchin teren. If you have a case where Reuven is adjoining a certain piece of land on the east and on the west, and Shimon owns the land that's on the north and the south, and you want to sell that square piece of land in the middle, then you have to write the land that is bordered by Reuven on 2 sides. The 2 sides are east and west. And that is bordered by Shimon on 2 sides, meaning the north and south. Here we have a diagram in the Rashbam of that case, where you have Reuven is on this side and on that side. Shimon is on this side and on that side. If you want to sell the entire square, you have to write on 2 sides and on 2 sides. If you don't write on 2 sides, then I would think it's only a triangle, only half of this land. Because if I say, I'm going to sell you the land that's bordered by Reuven and Shimon, so I might think, okay, bordered on Reuven on one side, Shimon on one side, so I know you get this side, and I'll just connect them with a diagonal line, and you wouldn't get this. So you have to make sure, if you mean that you're going to get the entire square, then you have to make sure that the seller writes Reuven on both sides and Shimon on both sides. Next question. Ibaya lehu. Siem lo et keranot mahu kimin gem mahu. The sage is asked about the following case. What if the seller defined only the corners? Then what would be the result? It looks kind of like this. Let's say the green parts here are owned by defined people, by whatever, Mr. A, B, C, and D. And so the seller says, and these other ones that are light green are owned by other people. So the seller says, I'm going to sell you the field that is bordered by land A, land B, land C, and land D. Now these are just on the corners, adjacent to the corners of this rectangle field that the seller owns. So does he mean by that he wants to sell the entire field in between? Could be, because he's giving the corners, and then you fill in the middle. But not necessarily. Maybe since he only mentioned the corner and not the whole side, he only means to sell that corner and connect it to the opposite corner. And this one, he says, I'm going to sell this corner and connect it to the opposite corner. So all he's selling him is an X. 1 furrow along this way and 1 furrow wide all along this way, and that's why he said only the corners. Maybe that's what the corner means, because the usual way to define boundaries is to tell you all the sides. So only the corners. Maybe that just means 1 furrow. So that language is not clear. Now, how about in the shape of a gamma? A capital gamma in Greek looks like a letter L or a bracket. So here's one picture in the Vilna Shas. If he delineates that you get the land that's between this field over here and this field and this field and this field, and just mentions the not just the corners like in the previous case, but those just partial sides. Here is a more detailed picture. Let's say Levi owns a field over here that's adjacent on part of this wall and part of this wall, and Levi also has something apart. This is Meser Lo, but let's say it's Levi, and he also owns a field over here that is adjacent on part of this field and part of the length of this field. And so the seller who owns this entire rectangle says, I'm going to sell you the land the land that is bordered by Levi's land here and Levi's land here, and that makes a bracket here like an L or like a gamma and a gamma here. So what does he mean by that? Does he mean the entire field in between? And it's sufficient that he gave you the outline over here and just extend this line, and the outline here, extend that line, and same thing here, and that means the entire field? Or maybe not. Maybe he means only from that point, make a line to the opposite point, and from this edge of that field, make a line to the other edge, and you get the strip of land, a diagonal strip of land in the middle. Maybe that's what he meant, because he's not using the usual delineation of the entire line, and also mention who's over here and who's over here, and so on. What about that case? And lastly, beserugin mahu teku. What if it's alternating? In other words, like in this picture, where the seller owns all of the land over here, and we're not sure if he means to sell all of this land or only part of it. So he writes, this land is bordered by the fields of Reuven, Levi, Yisachar, and Yosef. Now, on each of these edges, there are actually two people that own the land. Reuben owns this part, and Shimon owns this part. So if he wanted to be very clear, he would write the land that's bordered by, and he would mention all the names, Reuben, Shimon, and so on. But he didn't. He mentioned every other name. So by doing that, does he mean the entire field? And it's sufficient that he gave one part of this line and one part of this line, and then just extend the lines, and that means the whole rectangle anyway. Or maybe not. Maybe he said he meant only the land that's adjacent to Reuven, but not that adjacent to Shimon, nor that of Binyamin, which would end up getting a triangle here, this triangle, and that triangle, 4 slices of a pizza pie out of the 8, which ends up only being half of the field. So is that what he means? So we leave all these 3 questions unresolved. Masad lo meser rishon, umeser sheni, umeser shelishi, umeser revi'i lo masad lo, amar la Rav, kana kol chutz mimeser revi'i, ushmuel amar afilu meser revi'i. If someone sold a field and they delineated 3 of the sides, they mentioned those specific sides, side 1, side 2, side 3, but the 4th side they did not mention. In other words, like this. He said, I'm going to sell you this field, and he said, the land that's adjacent to Reuven on this side, Shimon on this, Levi on this side, but didn't say anything about that side. So we're going to have 3 opinions. Rav says that he acquires everything except for the 4th side. In other words, let's say on this side over here, we're going to discuss in a second whether it's in or out of the edge of those sides, right? And maybe Reuven here has until here, and then someone else owns this entire side here, or he owns the side within it, a furrow within it. So since he didn't mention the 4th side, he won't get that furrow that's on that side, but he'll get the rest of the land. He'll get all of this and everything that's in between this side and that side. He'll get it fully, but some other a piece of land, or that furrow, that strip, that would be the border here. If he mentioned the border, he would have gotten that too. But since he didn't mention that border, so he doesn't get anything on that side. That is Rav's opinion. Shmuel, however, says he even gets the 4th side. In other words, since he said 3 sides, then he gets also that furrow that's on the 4th side as well, because it's enough to mention 3, and then you can fill in the rest and figure it out. And there's the 3rd opinion. Rav Aseh says he only acquires 1 furrow around the 3 sides. In other words, since he mentioned only, I'm giving you the land that's on this side, and that side, and he left out this side, that means that he only gets these 1 furrow here, just the shape of a C, 1 furrow here, and he doesn't get any of the land in between. If he wanted to give land between, then he should have said the 4th side. And we're going to explain how Rav Aseh got to that conclusion. Savala kerav dama shiure shiyer. Rav Aseh agrees in principle with Rav that the seller is withholding something for himself, because he didn't say the 4th side. Now, whereas Rav said, well, he didn't say the 4th side, that means he doesn't want to give that furrow that's adjacent to that border on that 4th side. So Rav just said, you just remove that 1 furrow. However, Rav Aseh says, since he is withholding something on that side, then we should assume he's withholding all of the middle and as well, and he wants to give him only a furrow that's in the shape of a C, that's it, and nothing in the middle. Amar Rava, Hilcheta kana kol chutz mimeser revi'i. Rava says halacha follows something similar to Rav. He doesn't say halacha is like Rav, because he's going to limit it. But he says halacha is that he acquires the entire field except for the furrow along the fourth wall that he didn't mention. However, that's only if it's not included within those sides. But if it's included within those borders, then he does acquire it. Here's a picture that will be clearer. So here is lo muvla. In other words, you have these three sides that he delineates, and that last side, that furrow would be outside. It kind of covers the, this guy's field goes all the way here, and so covers over the edge of that side. So that's not included within, and that Rav would say, so Rava is saying that I would agree with Rav in that case that he doesn't get that furrow. However, if these guys, the land on this side goes further and overlaps this side over here, such that this furrow would be within, and then in that case, Rava says the seller would get that furrow along here because it's within that land. So that's the first qualification that Rava says. And another one, now even if it's not included in that space, so it is sticking out, and so therefore the buyer does not get it. And even when that side is not included in the space, and so therefore, according to Rava, that would not go to the buyer, that's only true if that fourth wall, that fourth side, has on it something significant, like a row of trees, or if it's a size that you can put 9 kav of seed on it. It's a significant amount. Because it's a significant amount, so therefore it's excluded from the deal and is not sold. So in order to be excluded from the deal, you need two things: that it's outside of the borders, and also that has something significant on it. However, if either it's inside, or even if it's outside, but there's nothing significant on it, that's what he says next. But if there's no row of trees on it, or if it's so small that you cannot plant 9 kav of seed on it, then it would be sold along with all the rest of it. So we can infer from this that when it is included, when it is inside the border, even though there is a row of trees, or it's big enough to plant 9 kav, then one would acquire it. So in other words, according to this, we're going to see another version of this in a second. But the point is that Rava says that this is excluded only in one case. Only when it's sitting outside and there's something significant on it. Then it's not included in the sale. However, if you have either that this is within the border, or it's outside the border but doesn't have anything significant on it, then it would be included in the sale. All right, that's all version number 1. Ika de'amre amar Rava hilcheta kana hakol va'afilu meser revi'i ve'lo maran ela de mivla aval mivla la kaneh. The second version of Rava says that halacha is that if he delineates 3 sides, he gets all of the land on those 3 sides and everything in between, and he also gets the 4th side. In other words, we're following the opinion of Shemuel in principle. However, Rava has some limitations on this, that's only true when it's subsumed. That 4th line is subsumed within, then he gets it. But if it's not subsumed and sticking out, then the buyer does not get that 4th side. But there's a limitation on that limitation. And even if it's subsumed in which case, according to this, it should be included in the sale. That's only true that's included in the sale if there is not a row of trees on it, and also it's not big enough that you could plant 9 kav of seed. So in other words, in order for the sale of that 4th side to be valid and granted, it has to be subsumed within the borders, and it has to be nothing significant on it. So then we say, okay, there's nothing significant there. It's within those borders, so fine, then that's included. even though it wasn't said explicitly. However, even if it was subsumed, but there is a row of trees on it, or it's big enough that you could plant 9 kav, then that was not included in the sale, because that's a significant thing that the seller would want to keep for himself. So we can derive from here that even if it's sticking out, it's not subsumed. If it's sticking out, even if there's no trees on it and it's not big enough to plant 9 kav, nevertheless, he does not acquire it. You need both conditions in order for it to be acquired. Both conditions are that it's subsumed and that there is nothing on it. But one or the other, then it would not go through with the sale. Now the Gemara summarizes what's the common denominator between them and what are the areas where they disagree. We see, according to both versions of Rava, that the seller is not keeping anything for himself within the inside part of the field. Right, definitely on the inside part, he gets it all, as opposed to Rav Aseh. And everybody would agree that if you have both of these conditions, that it's subsumed within, and there is no trees, and it's not big enough to plant 9 kav, so that's subsumed within, and there's nothing on it. So therefore, for sure, according to both versions of Rava, that would be included in the sale. The buyer would get it. And on the other hand, if they have the opposite of those two, if it's not subsumed, sticking out, and also there is on it either a row of trees or it's big enough to plant 9 kav of seed, then that would definitely be excluded from the sale. The seller wants to keep that for himself. So they agree on all these points. Where do they disagree? Mivla v'ika la mivla v'leka ale. Itmar la lahagisa v'itmar la lahagisa shuda de daine. If it's subsumed, but there is something significant on it, or it's not subsumed, but there's nothing significant on it, or not a big size, so then one ikad amres says this way, another ikad amres says that way. And therefore, if this kind of case comes to a judge, it's left up to the discretion of the judge. And he has to figure out this type of seller. Let's see, is he a generous person? Is he a stingy person? Would he want to include that? Would he not want to include that? And so the judge will have to do his own investigation, and he can follow whichever opinion he thinks applies better in that case. We next have 2 statements by Rabbah. Both of them are about ambiguous language that a person selling land says. Amar Rabbah, palga di'itli bar'a, palga bar'a di'itli riv'a. Let's say you have 2 people that own land together. They're partners. And one of the partners says to a third party that I'm going to sell you, and he uses the following language, palga, half of what I have in the land. In that case, the buyer gets half of all of the land, because he's saying half, the half that I have in the land, and he owns half of the land. So the entirety of that partner's ownership goes over to the third party. However, if he switches the words around a little and he says, palga, half of the land that I have, well, in that case, he means only half of the land that he owns. He only owns half the land. So he's only selling half of the half that he has, which ends up being 1/4. That's Rabbah's statement. Now, Rabbah's student, Abaye, asks, Amar le Abaye, Mai shenachi u mai shenahachi, ishtik. Abaye asks, what's the difference between this formula and that formula? They sound very similar to me. Why can't you parse them the same way? And Rabbah did not answer. So what does that mean when he doesn't answer? Does that mean he agreed or didn't agree? Amar Abaye, ana sabri mit ishti kabule kibela. I thought that since he was quiet and didn't answer me, that means he accepted my challenge and he changed his mind. However, velohi chazenan hu shetareden afki mi bemor uchtib behu hachi palga di'itli bar'a palga bar'a di'itli rib'a. It's not true, because afterwards I found these deeds of sale from my master's house. That's Rabbah. And it said in those deeds of sale, in a case where someone used the language, a partner said, half of the half that I own in the land, then he means to sell his entire share, which is half of the whole land. Whereas if he says half of the land that I own, then that means half of the half that he owns, which is a quarter. And so you see that Abba never changed his mind. He just didn't want to feel like answering Abaye's question. He says, Abaye, you figure it out, right? You're a bright student. You could figure it out yourself. But he never changed his mind in actuality. Ve'amad Abba, another statement that Abba says, also about similar language, but that means different things. Mesad ad dimina palga. Someone sells to someone else land and delineated the three sides of it. But so you know that it's going to be the south side is going to be this border, and the two sides, how far it's going to go. The question is, how far north? Could be very far north, or only a little bit north, somewhere in between. We don't know. There's an entire plot of land that the seller owns, so it could be the entire thing, half of it, or a minimal amount of it. So, for the fourth side, he writes, the boundary of the field is the land through which the field is halved. So the boundary of that, this north boundary, is going to be where it's halved. In that case, he means to sell half the land. He gave the bottom boundary and the two sides, and then you take the entire land that the seller owns all the way up the northern side and take half of it, and that's what he means when he says that. However, if he says mesad ara demina pisika, the boundary of the field is the land from which a plot can be set apart. Right, it's meaning the minimal amount that you can call it a plot. So I'm giving you these three sides. Here's the bottom and the two sides, and the fourth side should be something that will make a field that you can set it apart. Now, how much is the minimum amount of a field that you can call it a field? As we said earlier, the area where you can plant 9 kav of seed. And so that's all he would get is that minimal amount. That's what Abbas said. Amar le Abaye, "Mai shenachi, mai shenachi." Ishtik, and Abaye here asked him again. Says, "Well, I don't see the difference between these two formulas. It's not so clear to me that it should be a different outcome. Can you explain it?" And Abaye was quiet. Sebur mina idi v'idi palga. And so, because the sages heard that the Rabbah did not give any answer, so they assumed that Rabbah changed his mind, and he thought that no matter which one you use, whether you say this formula or that formula, it means half of the field. However, later on they found out that that's not so. Rav Yemar bar Shelemya that later reported that he spoke to Abaye, and Abaye clarified the matter of what Rabbah actually thought in the end. Ben mesad ar ademina palga, ben mesad ar ademina pisika. I amar le ilen masranaha palga. La amar le ilen masranaha tisha kabin. In fact, the formula itself doesn't matter. Whether he says the boundary of the field is the land through which the field is halved, or the boundary of the field is the land through which a plot is set apart, these are equivalent. What merely makes a difference is if he adds on the following words or not. If he adds on, it says, these are its boundaries. So then by adding these words, these are its boundaries, he means to be generous and give up to half. Give half of the land. However, if he does not add, these are the boundaries, and just says one of these two formulas, then he means the minimal amount of only Tish'a Kabin. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.